part of our goal is that me sharing this with you will enable you to be advocates, each of you in your small groups to say, well, I understand the rationale, and I'm able to explain the rationale to you as well, and this is why we're doing it, and this is what the outcome should be. So our service schedule, let me go ahead and tell you what we're going to propose, what we're going to advance, will be an 8:30 early service, 9:45, and 11:15. So the last two services move up an hour, and by the way, Saturday nights does as well. So Saturday night at 5:30, and Sunday morning, 8:30, 9:45, and 11:15. So why is it that we need to do this? What is it that we're seeking to accomplish by doing it? Starting in 2009, we began to count how many people gather at each service. I can tell you right now, on Sunday mornings at 9 o'clock service, we're running 1,400 people in that service. Between all three other services, we're running about 4,000. That's broken down 700 on Saturday night, 2,900 on Sunday morning at 10:45, and 400 at 12:15. Somebody do the math and make sure I'm right. That should be about 4,000 because we're running right around 5,400 in total between all of the services. And now that doesn't count children and all of that kind of stuff. That's just people in the worship center for our services. Well, here's a phenomenon we discovered, and this has gone back probably beyond when we were counting, because if you look at the room before we had the new worship center, if you looked at the room at 10:45 in 2010 or 11 or 12, if you looked at it then and you looked at it in 2004, it looked the same. Because shortly after we began a contemporary service, that service had outpaced the traditional service, which is what we used to have, just traditional. It had outpaced it, and it was a service that was growing, and it filled. And that service has maintained somewhere between 3,000 and 3,500, I might even be more accurate because I want to be precise, 2,800 to 3,300, somewhere in that range has been the attendance of that service as long as we've been counting. What that tells you in church growth world, what they tell you, anybody that does this can look at that graph and say, that's an indicator. It's an indicator that your facility is at its max. Well, that's a little bewildering because we have more seats than that. We have 4,350 seats. In fact, when we first proposed the change, some people asked, are we having this issue because you reduced the number of seats and now we've created a crisis? And the answer is no. We have more seats than we need in the room, but there's something about our campus. We're not sure, and I think it's actually a combination of things. It has something to do with parking, how far away from the building you have to park in order to get there. It has something to do with parking, at what point you can't find the right parking place. Another pinch point might be the preschool and children's ministries. Our preschool, we have to have preschoolers on the first floor of buildings, and those facilities are at capacity, especially at that 10:45 hour. So I really believe it's a combination of A, B, and C, and probably some other factors that we don't know. But here's the reality that we do know. The reality that we do know is we can average about 3,000 people on a consistent basis in that room on a weekend, and that's the fullest service we can have. And so it may be any series of those factors create this phenomenon where our room seats about 3,500 people. 80% of 3,500 would be somewhere around 2,800. That's where we are, and it's where we're stuck. And so our desire is to do something that gets us unstuck at that number at that prime time. And so one of the challenges we had was the timing of this thing. We had just gone all out, and man, our people were so enthusiastic about that. At the beginning of all out, we even saw an increase in attendance. It didn't sustain the whole time, the difficulty and everything, but it still was strong the whole time, and giving was good the whole time. And then we come back in, and man, everybody's enthusiastic about the new room and a lot of excitement. And then, man, just a few months later, here we are, another time change. And I wish like crazy we would have known before we came back in what we found out in the season of back in, because we would have instituted the change beforehand. But let me give you a little history of what happened when we started the Saturday night service. We started the Saturday night service, and we invited people who were in our 10:45 service. The primary way that Saturday night service grew and grows is inviting people who attend 1045 to change their worship time. Not to change by an hour earlier, to change by a day earlier. And come Saturday instead of come on Sunday. Right now, we're averaging about 700 people on Saturday night. When we started, it was right around 400 or 500. But guess what that did? That emptied seats out of the 1045 service. And do you know what happened to those empty seats? They filled back up again. And we weren't counting when we started the service, but here's what I do. When we started the Saturday night service, but here's what I do know. It was full before we started it. We moved 400 or 500 people out of it, and it's still full. It's still there. But it was confirmed. That suspicion was confirmed when we came back in. Because we did something when we came back in. We kept the 12:15 service. And when we kept the 12:15 service, 400 people moved from the 10:45 hour to the 12:15 hour. And do you know that for the first time in this year, 2015, for the first time since we started a Saturday night service, we've seen an overall average attendance increase. In our contemporary services, we've added 325 people on average by moving 400 people out of the 1045 service. So the evidence is overwhelming. If we can create capacity at prime time, then we can probably fill that capacity and grow. So another of the pieces of evidence or information that we use that some of our peers have discovered is that if you create service times away from prime time, people will naturally divide themselves. I get the opportunity, or we get the opportunity to, quote, force people to do something in an environment when I really can't force anybody to do anything. But by not having a prime time hour, people will naturally divide themselves between two not so perfect hours. So instead of having a service that starts somewhere between 10:30 and 11, which is the preferred time, let me move one just a little bit before it. Let me move one just a little bit after, and those people will naturally divide the ones coming between those two options. We've got to get two services that are more evenly split as opposed to one service with 3,000 people and one service with 400 people. We looked at a lot of different options. We looked at the option of changing all of our worship styles and going to one style. There's some who still say that's what we ought to do. Here's what I can tell you. I have found that instead of finding a style everybody likes, you create a style nobody likes. Everybody hates it just enough, right? And so we don't think that that's the right way to go. We think people like the worship language that they're worshiping in, and we want to honor that and celebrate it. The church's goal, by the way, is not to teach somebody to like or appreciate a certain kind of music. We're not teaching music. We're using music to teach the gospel. Amen. And so we're going to use whatever music the culture is connected to for the sake of the gospel. It's not our desire to try to convince somebody that there's one style of music that's right and there's one style of music that's wrong. That's not, all music belongs to God. It's all God's music, and we're going to use all the music we can to draw people to the gospel. If you've been looking, I've seen some of you, you're looking at your little thing there, you go, wait a second, there's not enough minutes in this time here to do everything that you normally do, and you are correct. So it's going to require a significant change in the way we do Sunday mornings, the way we do our services. And we believe this is a wonderful opportunity to do something that we've been wanting to do, but again, been resistant because we just didn't know how to implement it. And that is, we are going to schedule our services for 60 minutes as opposed to what we do now, scheduling our services for 75 minutes. Now, I'm choosing my words very carefully. Notice I didn't say we have 75-minute services. I just said we schedule for 75 minutes. You heard that, right? Okay, so that's what we're doing going forward. We're scheduling for 60 minutes. We value God's speaking to you too much to spend it doing other things. And we're going to do what we can during those 60 minutes to make it a power-packed time of worship and Bible study for all of us. And so that'll mean 8:30 to 9:30 and 9:45 to 10:45, 11:15 to 12:15. Those will be our services. There's also one other big factor, and that was that we one of the barriers to making this change was we did not know how in the world would we turn from a traditional service to a contemporary service. The staging and all of that John and his team have to deal with is pretty complex, and how you have to turn from an orchestra and a choir to a band and singers. But John and his team have worked hard to be able to shrink that time to 15 minutes. That's going to be a challenge, but so just as soon as the last note hits in the traditional service, they'll start switching the stage, and they say they need all 15 minutes, so we'll probably be rolling the pre-service video while they're still making the last-minute adjustments and sound checks and everything in that on the platform. But shrinking that to 15 minutes and then providing the 30 minutes between the last 2 hours is a big win for us. Next Sunday, Pastor will announce to the church the new time schedule, and we'll implement January 9 and 10. The second weekend in January will be when we go to the new time schedule. And I am fully persuaded that what this is going to do is going to create an opportunity for us to grow. We're going to see growth that we've not experienced in a long time by creating the capacity for us.